Hi, everyone, and welcome to this training on the ArchivesSpace Digital Objects module. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by your trainer, Brittany Newberry of the Atlanta University Center. In advance of the training, you received an email with an agenda for the training with links to all of the materials that you'll need to participate. I'm going to drop that link into the chat again when I finish giving these remarks. So if you don't have access to that, you will get it in just a second in the chat. These materials are for participants of the live training only. So if you're listening to the recording of this training in the future, this does not apply. I want to very briefly go over our agenda for today. So this is the agenda that you received and will receive again in the chat in just a second. In this agenda, there is a link to the course materials I'm about to show you. So that's where you access those course materials. You'll also find learning objectives and participant expectations. Thank you to everyone who completed the pre-workshop survey. That was very helpful. And then our agenda for today is there. It shouldn't be a surprise to you. This is going to be all about the ArchivesSpace Digital Objects module. Go ahead and keep in mind that we do have two planned breaks, one at 1:10 p.m. Eastern and one at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Time will be sort of loose. If we happen to wrap up a section a little bit earlier, we may take our breaks a little bit earlier, but we will take those breaks firmly at that time. We won't run over. If we start to run over, I will make sure we take a minute and we take a break, because breaks are very important when you're going over digital objects. And then I'll talk about this a little bit more in just a second, but I've also included some handy resources in your agenda that you may want to take a look at after the workshop is over, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just want to make sure you were aware of the agenda and where you can find a list of everything we're going to cover today. In addition to the agenda, the following training materials, which you're seeing on your screen now, are included in the drive. There is a handy workbook. We're going to be moving really rapidly through this training. You are not expected to follow along in this workbook page by page, and there is no expectation that you have it up on your screen or that you printed it out, but it is very useful to have, and save it somewhere on your own machine so that you can use it in the future. It includes exercises that you can use to practice what you're learning today, so be sure to take a look at that later on. There is also a list here on your screen of test instances for your use. All you need to do is find your name on the training machine assignment spreadsheet that you're seeing, and you can either click or copy and paste the link next to your name into your browser for your own personal test instance of ArchivesSpace. You log in using the username and password provided. It's admin for everyone. This test instance will be available to you through the end of the week. Once the test instances go away, are no longer available to you, you can always use our sandbox to test any of this material or use any of these or do any of these exercises if you don't have access to an ArchivesSpace at your own institution. You are not going to need this during the training. You don't need to be doing the exercises as Brittany is doing them in the training, so don't feel pressure to do that unless you really, really want to. This is just here in case you want to try out the exercises after the training. And then finally, there is some test data in this sample digital object files for you to use if you don't have any handy at your own institution. And like I said, in addition to all of this, you've also been provided with that list of resources at the bottom of your agenda about using ArchivesSpace and ArchivesSpace membership that you may find useful. It includes our most frequently used resources and also some additional info about digital objects that we thought you might like to have handy. Also included at the end of your agenda is a link to a training evaluation, and we really hope you complete that at the end of this training. As most of you know, we're in the middle of sort of a community-wide training pilot project, and it's really helpful to know whether or not these trainings have value to you and what you would like for us to do differently or what you liked. You'll also notice we're using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are muted. If you'd like to ask questions of the trainer or Brittany or myself, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a general question or you just want to talk to your fellow participants, please feel free to use the chat. But if you have a question specifically about what's happening in the training, please do use that Q&A. We will read and answer many questions during the allocated time for Q&A, but I'm also going to be answering questions directly in the Q&A to keep us on schedule. So I'll be answering those while Brittany is instructing. Keep an eye out for that on the chat, because there will be plenty of additional information coming in via text too. You also have the ability to turn on closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can elect to show or hide subtitles by selecting live transcript at the bottom of your screen, or potentially more, depending on what features you have in Zoom. And you can turn those on by pressing the little up arrow there. You can also elect to view the full transcript, either in tandem with the subtitles or in lieu of subtitles, by selecting that option. If you need technical assistance or something's going wrong in the training, feel free to chat me, Jessica Crouch, privately. I'll be happy to help. Again, please keep in mind we're using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training. That's version 3.0.1. If you're currently using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We also aren't going to be able to troubleshoot issues with your implementation of ArchivesSpace at your organization. So if you have some questions related to problems you're having at your organization with your ArchivesSpace, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. Also, keep in mind that this workshop assumes prior experience with ArchivesSpace and familiarity with ArchivesSpace terminology. We will not be covering basic record creation or providing an application overview. If that's what you're looking for, I recommend watching a recording or attending one of our basics workshops. And finally, keep in mind there are 100 participants registered for this workshop, and we're all coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. Remember that the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchivesSpace events, including virtual events. And please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions with your fellow participants, Brittany and myself, in both the Q&A and the chat. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, Brittany, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. So as Jessica said, I'm Brittany Newberry. I'm a processing archivist at the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library, which I will probably just refer to as the AUC for the rest of this workshop. At the AUC, I train staff, volunteers, and interns on how to use our ArchivesSpace instance. I am responsible for updating and creating manuals and workflows, and I basically help us decide when to update and upgrade our instance. I'm also the current chair of the ArchivesSpace User Advisory Council. We're rotating off at the end of this month. And I am active in various other things, such as Society of American Archivists and Society of Georgia Archivists. So today we are going to discuss the digital objects module. I first want to just discuss what it is, so you aren't confused throughout this workshop. So I'm just going to share my screen so we're already on ArchivesSpace website. So you should just be seeing the ArchivesSpace homepage. There are several ways to access digital objects: through the Create drop-down and through Browse. So in terms of ArchivesSpace, digital objects are basically a way to describe and link to your digital materials held within a digital asset management system or held on file servers. ArchivesSpace itself is not a digital asset management system, and it cannot hold the files. It can only provide description and a way to link. So within ArchivesSpace, it enables the description of these digital objects, such as your digitized archival resources or born digital materials. So it's usually comprised of 3 items: the metadata record, which can range from descriptive information to support discovery of the item, the rights information, the technical details about the digital files. It contains the content file, which are digital files that range from still to moving images to audio recordings to textual documents such as PDF records. And so it can be represented in the record, and you can have multiple files of different types, but having the same content. So you can have a TIFF for a master, a JPEG, a GIF, And then it includes that link. So our digital wrapper that binds the metadata record with the content file. So you will add that to your digital object record and link out to where it is actually held. So within ArchivesSpace, you have the ability to create two different kinds of digital objects, simple and complex. So simple just refers to one in which the intellectual content of the record is combined in one digital content file. So that's just, you have an image and you want to link to the actual physical object that you've described in ArchivesSpace, as well as the digitized version of it that may be in your Islandora, your other, any kind of digital asset management system. So you just have an image. But you may also have a diary or a book that's multiple pages, and you want to provide a record for each of those because you have each digitized separately rather than in a complete version. And that is known as a complex object. So ArchivesSpace gives you the ability to describe those within the digital object record. And I wanted to show you what that could look like to you. So on the screen is, this is also in your workbook, but you can see that there's a simple object, which could be just a PDF, and there's just a general flat complex object where you have multiple versions of an image from the same event. And then you can have a hierarchical complex object, which is, you have the cover of the book, the title page, the introduction, then you have chapters and pages within the chapter. So you can get as granular as you want within the digital objects record. I want to point out that if you do create complex digital objects, those aren't supported via EAD, so you can't export EAD on complex digital objects. It will just give you the EAD of simple digital objects. But you can export METs and mods for complex digital objects. So there are various use cases for the digital object module. At the AUC, we use it two ways. So we are currently working on our born digital collections that are completely born digital and are hybrid. And we have decided to represent those as digital objects within a resource record. So resource record being your finding aid, and we're linking as an instance a digital object for the born digital material. So we would describe it in a resource and then link to them. You could potentially build out the whole born digital collection within the digital objects record and just have the file system hierarchy represented within that. But you won't be able to export it via EAD. And we also use the module to basically link to our digitized materials. So at the AUC, we use Islandora for our digital asset management system. We create handle links that we use as our links, which to get to those materials on the public side. So we add records to our finding aids, and then for each archival object, we will create a digital object instance, and we will link to where that exists in Islandora. So that way people can access them by going to our finding aids website, and they see that it has digital materials and they can just click on it and get to it. I will be showing you how all of this works here in a moment, but I wanted to just give a brief overview of what you could potentially do with the digital objects module. So it really depends on you in your institution, how you want to do it. You can make digital objects as simple or as complex as I've shown as you want. But first, we're going to discuss how to basically just build a simple digital object. But before doing that, I wanted to know if there were any general questions that I need to answer.
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, let's give it a minute. If you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat now. Just general questions. Obviously, this is just the beginning, and you will be seeing how to create simple and complex digital objects in just a minute. It is important, a few things that Brittany pointed out, I want to reiterate. So simple digital objects are, like she said, it's that one image that you have, that one file URI for that one thing, that one digital object. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's just a single photograph or a single scanned letter. It could be a PDF of an entire book, but because it's one single digital file, that it would be a simple digital object. If you would like to export your digital objects as EAD, like Brittany said, simple digital objects would be the way to go. You can link simple digital objects to your archival objects in resource records, and you can export those as EAD. If you would prefer to take that same book that is a single PDF that I just mentioned, and you want to build out a hierarchy in the digital object, meaning you scan every page individually and every individual page gets its own record, and you basically treat it just like you would a resource record in ArchivesSpace, where you build out the hierarchy that might be titles and chapters and pages, you can't export that as EAD. You can export it, like Brittany mentioned, as METs and mods in Dublin Core, but you wouldn't be able to link it to your archival objects and export it as EAD. So that's something that you definitely want to think about before you start creating digital objects, or if you already are creating digital objects, you definitely want to think through, why am I creating these digital objects in ArchivesSpace? What is my intended purpose, and how do I want to describe them? Because they are represented in exporting in two very different ways. All right, there are no questions that popped up into the chat, Brittany, and of course I'll answer any that come through while you're working. So I guess let's go ahead and dive in and create a record. There's no better way to learn than to just dive in.
Yeah. So first I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet. Let me get to that, because spreadsheets are a lifesaver. So let me this one. So at the AUC, we import everything into Islandora using spreadsheets. So we create a CSV file that's used for uploading, and then in turn that CSV file into an Excel sheet that we can use to add our digital objects to ArchivesSpace. So pretty much everyone in the archives department works on digital objects. It was a handy thing to do during the pandemic, so it was something that we just kept doing. So we do it this way, but before you ask, there is an easier way to do it, and we will go over that towards the end of the workshop. So we create these.
Brittany?
Yes.
Could you blow your screen up a little bit, please?
Yeah. Okay, so I hope you can see everything now.
Maybe a little bigger.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, on my end it looks huge. So I forget that my screen is pretty large.
Thank you.
Okay, so we create these spreadsheets just as a way to simply copy and paste into ArchivesSpace. So we decide what fields we want to use and then go from there. So I have the spreadsheet open for me to just use while we're creating these. So we'll go back to ArchivesSpace. There are two ways to create digital objects, either in the resource record you are working on. So if you're in that resource record and you're in an archival object and you want to add an instance, you can add a digital object instance. I will show that after we've created one. You can add it, you can create it from the create menu, and that is usually the way you do it. If you're not going to add it to a archival object, or you're not sure which archival object this is part of when you first create it. So it really depends on your workflow, how you first create these. So this is a blank digital object record. So I want to point out that for digital objects, there are only two required fields. There's the title field and the identifier. The identifiers must be unique to all the digital objects within this repository. So digital objects can be different per repository. So if you have multiple ones, you won't see the digital objects on the backside of a different repository. You would have to go into that repository and see it. And with that in mind, you don't have to have a different identifier from that one. So if you have the same image as a part of or same PDF as a part of two repositories, you would have to create a digital object for both. But on the public side, you can see multiple digital objects from multiple repositories at the same time. So just keep that in mind. The identifier has to be unique within the repository, and it could be a mixture of alphanumeric. So it can be letters or numbers. It can't be special characters and underscores or anything like that. So those are only two required fields. As you move through the record and you open up sub-records, other fields become required based on the sub-record that you open. So we're going to start with the title here. I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet. See that the title of this first one I have is Josephine Dibble Murphy. These are actual items from the AUC. So I just want to point that out. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. And then I'm going to copy the identifier from the spreadsheet as well. And paste it here. So you can choose to publish this now or publish it later. We like to review them before they get published because we use the public side and we want to make sure the content is correct before publishing. But you would do so here by just clicking the checkbox. Then you have the option of choosing a VRA core level. So this is primarily for use in multi-level VRA core compliant records to indicate that a description is about a collection, a work, or an image. So if that is something you follow at your institution, you can choose that here. We're not going to choose one. And then you can choose the digital object type, which is just a generic term indicating the basic content type of the digital object. So it does correspond to MODS element. So you have cartographic for maps, mixed materials if you're not sure if it's a mixture of different kinds, moving image, sound recording, still image, text for PDFs and such. So we're going to choose still image because it's a photograph. Here you can choose to add restrictions, if restrictions apply to this digital object, or if you have them applied to the archival object and want to make sure people are aware that the digitized version also has restrictions. So that is the basic information record. So from there, you can choose to add various subrecords. Majority of people will add a file version. So to do that, you just click add file version. And then the only required field here is the file URI. So this is the identifier for that file, the actual like image, the PDF, and how you would link to it. This can be a URI, so resolvable URI like to your actual public digital collections website, or it can be a file path or the file directory. So if you have your images on a file server and you want to use digital objects as a way to create a way to find them easily and within your ArchivesSpace system, if it's your content management system, you could put the file path here. You don't have to make this public. This is published separately from the basic information. So if you want the URI to be a file path and just for internal use, so you can find it for that researcher and send them a copy or pull it up on a reading room computer, you can have that in here. But if you want to use like a regular URI, you can add that here and publish it and have it in the public side or wherever you display your digital objects. So I'm going to go back to the spreadsheet. I'm going to copy this handle link here. And just paste it here. I'm going to come back and publish that later. So then you can choose various things to go with this link. You can use a use statement. So what is this file intended for? Is this the image master? Is it the thumbnail? Is it a video master? That kind of thing. Like if you want to add multiple file versions, which you can have a file version for the master TIFF, the access JPEG, and then like a web thumbnail, and you can choose which one. Well, I would say you could choose which one to make representative, but that is not like something that's in use currently. but you can have all of those either be published or just one of them be published and available on the public side or in your public interface. So you can add all file versions here if that's what your institution wants to do. So we're going to say, we're going to leave that blank, but I just wanted to point it out to you. Then there's the Xlink Actuate attribute, and this refers to exporting to indicate how the digital object should display in the context of EAD. So it is used in conjunction with Xlink Show attribute, so it tells you whether or not it will occur automatically or must be requested by the user. So on load, on request, other, none, those are your options. So we're gonna, I always get confused which ones to use, but I'm going to choose on load for now. And then the Xlink Show attribute is basically how that would be displayed. So in the context of the EAD document and in your public user interface. So is it going to embed, be a new tab, just remain on that page? So when you click on it, it won't open up a new tab or window. It will just open up that web link there. So we're going to say new. So I'm going to change that to on request and new. Then you can choose your file format name. So if this is a JPEG, you can choose that here. If it's a GIF, if it's a PDF, if it's a TIFF, so it spells it out, but these refer to those file format names. And then you can add the version. So if there's a version of this and you want to make note of that, you can add it there. You can also add the file size. If it has a checksum, you can add that here. You can also choose the method of the checksum. If you want a caption to appear with it, or you want to add caption information with it, you can add that here. And that will allow you to just display a caption for the digital object. And then if you want to continue adding more, you can continue to add more file versions. You can add multiple file versions to a single digital object record. And it will still be seen as a simple digital object because complex is that hierarchy. Or if you want to just continue adding versions of a image to this, you can. They will have the same identifier, so they need to be, you need to make sure you do want to add those multiple file versions. And you can add a thumbnail, but I'm not going to go over that today, but it's something you can do. And I recommend checking out the ArchivesSpace resources about thumbnails. So we're going to leave this as is now. I'm going to show that you can add languages. So for this one, I have in my spreadsheet that it says no linguistic content. So if you have a requirement at your institution to add languages to everything, but it's an image and it has no language, nothing on the back or anything, you can choose no linguistic content / not applicable. You can add script if you want to add a script for the language. You can add multiple languages, such as with other records that have this subrecord. You can add dates. So we're going to add a date to this one. It's circa 1950. You can choose whether it's bulk, inclusive, single. We're going to choose inclusive and add a begin and end date. So you can add as much descriptive metadata information as you want, so technical and the descriptive information, and that will that you decide you need. But as I said, you can keep this as simple as you want and just have a title and identifier. Really depends on how you plan to use the module. Other subrecords you can add are extents. You can add agent links. So if this is an image of a person or it's a book by a person, or you want to make sure the creator is known or the source of the information is known, you can add an agent link. You can add subjects. So if you want people to know the subjects of the materials, if that's something you would like as a part of this record, you can do such. You can add notes about it, multiple notes. You can add external documents, write statements. We add write statements to all of ours just so people know who to contact when they want to use it or if they have issues with it. And then you can add collection management and user defined. So those are the fields that you can and the subrecords you can use when creating a simple digital object. So I'm going to save this record and show you a few other things about simple digital object records. So when you save a record, you will see that it has started this hierarchy. Similar to resource records, you can build upon this and start creating complex digital objects by adding children and rapid data entry, which we'll go over later. When you have decided you want to publish it and make sure it's on the public user interface, you can choose to publish all here. And so I'm going to do that, and that will publish every published checkbox within the record. So even the file version. So if you don't want a file version published, I would not recommend pressing publish all. And similar to publish all within ArchivesSpace, there is no unpublish all currently. So I would use that whenever you feel that you are sure that you want every file version and the basic information published and anything else that has the publish checkbox. So you can see it's been published, and then you have the ability to view the published record. So we're going to click on that. And you'll see that it displays the identifier, the title, the identifier, the dates, the language of materials, anything about your repository. And then it has this nice little red box that says that it's a digital object, still image, and that you can click on, and you will see, you will be let, a new window will open. Oh, I chose the wrong link. That's my bad. But the link will resolve and it'll take you to where that digital object is. This took us to the finding aid for Josephine Dibble Murphy because I chose the wrong link from our digital collections website. But the link will resolve and open in a new tab because we chose new rather than replace or anything else when choosing the X link show attribute. And as I said, you can change this into a thumbnail. Thumbnails will not resize to thumbnail size. So you will have to choose an image that's actually thumbnail size to display, embed and display here if you are doing thumbnails, because it will show the size that the image is rather than resizing it. So I just want to point that out if you're considering displaying thumbnails in your PUI. So that is why that is everything so far about simple digital objects. But before I move on, I wanted to see if there were any questions.
There are. All right. I've been answering some of them in the Q&A, but there are a couple that I wanted to go ahead and answer out loud. We're also getting some questions in the chat. Just for ease of managing the questions, if you could put your questions in the Q&A, that would be really helpful. One question that I haven't answered yet, would you mind repeating how to handle identifiers for the same digital object referenced by different repositories? Would you need to create separate digital object records for the same digital object if they're referenced in different repositories?
So it depends on if you're using like the public user interface for ArchivesSpace, you can see multiple repositories at the same time, but it won't. If you only have it in one repository, it will only say that it's a part of one repository. So here it's just showing that repository and that information. But if I was to choose a different repository that had the same image, it wouldn't show this as a part of that repository, but you are able to see all digital materials within this public user interface from every repository. So if you want both to be in if you want it to be in multiple repositories, you would have to create a record at each repository for the digital object. So it really depends on how what you're using for your public user interface, and if you want people to be aware that it's associated with both or multiple repositories.
Yeah, there are some record types that are shared across repositories, but digital objects is not one.
Yeah. So you would have to go over here and select your different repository, go in, create the digital object again, and that way it will be associated with both. And even if you delete it from this repository and have it in another one, it won't delete from that one because they're not linked in that way, those records. I hope I didn't make that more confusing.
All right, let's see. Okay. I can answer this one. Did you say that make representative isn't currently functioning? Is the plan to incorporate make representative into future updates? So correct. Make representative currently doesn't do anything. It was part of an update, but it doesn't do anything. So don't use it. There were a couple questions about if you do want to make something representative, then how do you do it? Make sure that, like, if you have a use copy or the whatever file version you want to make sure is displayed in the PUI, make sure you list it first in your file versions.
Yeah.
So you can reorder your file versions using the little hamburger on the left. So if there's one version you want to make sure that's the version that your users see in the PUI, make sure it's at the very top.
Yeah, so we just click on this and you can drag and drop. If one is unpublished and the other is published, and you'll see the published one over the unpublished one, obviously. If there's a version you don't want people to see, but you want to have the data in ArchivesSpace.
All right. Is there a way to identify if a file version is the preservation file versus an access version? You can do that through the use statement dropdown in the file versions.
It doesn't really say that, but I'm not even sure if this is configurable. Let me see.
Yeah, it's
yes.
So this list is configurable. So if you however you refer to your file versions, you can configure this list to reflect that.
Through the controlled values list available system. Available through the manage controlled values list. You do have to be a system admin to access this list and to change it.
Do you need to have a digital asset management system to have digital objects link out? We don't have a DAMS yet. We're working toward implementing one in the next fiscal year.
In order to link out to like a web server, like a DAMS, you would need that to have, as long as you have resolvable URIs, like if you have a way to do that, then you can link to them. You can also link to your file paths, but those aren't necessarily resolvable if your server isn't a public one. So you can have the file path in there, but it's not, and it doesn't mean that your researcher will actually see the image. So it's not necessary to have a DAMS to use digital object records. Just want to point that out. You can use them any way that it makes sense to you with your digital materials.
And if you have your digital materials on a server somewhere, like Brittany said, as long as that server is public facing, you could just link out to that server. You don't necessarily have to have a separate digital asset management system. I've seen institutions that link to Google Drives before.
Yeah.
It's sort of, whatever works for you in your situation.
Yeah, I forget about Google, but yes, you can use Google Drive. I think Dropbox if you have it open for like sharing, that kind of thing. So, not recommended, but it's possible.
Right. ArchivesSpace allows for a lot. And if you don't have resolvable URIs, like Brittany said, for now you could just write down the file path or a note letting people know where the material is.
Yeah, this doesn't have to be a link. It can be words. It can be text. So,
yeah. Is the caption field searchable? Yes, it is. It's keyword searchable.
Yeah, most fields that are available on the public site are keyword searchable. So you should be able to see that. And when you are in the digital object, it would appear underneath the box.
All right, we are all caught up on the Q&A. Oh, will linking to other records be added to the digital object record?
So the other records that you're linked to. So I'm about to show you how to add them to archival object. So it doesn't show you when you're in the digital object record itself that it's linked to this when you're in edit mode, but if you're searching for it, you will see it's say found in, and it will tell you which archival object record it's found in. And I think when you're in like the view mode, it will show you the linked record. Am I saying that correctly, or I'm thinking of other records?
I think it will.
Yeah, well, I will show you that.
About to
So
find
we
out.
will, yes, we will do that. So we can determine that.
All right, I think we're ready.
Okay, cool. So I just want to point out before I move to linking to archival objects that when you create one and you saved it, you will obviously see this toolbar for publishing, adding events, exporting, which we'll go over later. You can merge them. So if you've created multiple digital objects and you actually figured out, oh, I made a duplicate, you can merge that if you added more information to one and you want them both. You can transfer them to different repositories, but it will delete it from this repository. And then there's more like creating an assessment about it. So if you want to create assessment about that digitized version or the born digital item, you can. Different preferences will show different things up here. So it depends on your permissions levels, not preferences, permissions. So if you are a system admin, you'll see everything, but a general like advanced data entry may not see all of these options. And then you have the ability to express things you don't want seen, either in the SaaS side by people who don't have permission to see it, or on the public side, this will restrict it from view. And then deleting it, obviously, just deletes it from the whole implementation. And if you delete it, it's gone. You're not getting it back, at least not easily. So we're going to now navigate to a resource record that I created, and I'm going to show you how to link to an archival object. So we're going to find the Jane Doe papers. So in our spreadsheet, we always indicate what collection is from. We generally only create one spreadsheet per collection. So we add on to it as items are digitized. So people aren't confused about what collection is. But if you have, for some reason, multiple spreadsheets, it's good to indicate the collection. We also like to add the box and folder numbers so people can easily find the archival object if for some reason the archival object and the digital object are not named the same thing. But there's an easier way to do that too, and I will show you that when we get into like importing data. So we're gonna go into edit mode. You can do this either edit or view it really. Go into edit mode, and then we're going to scroll to photographs. So we're gonna go to photograph series, and we'll see that there's a Josephine Dibble Murphy photograph file. We're going to go to instances. So this is where you would add a digital instance, not a container instance. So we're going to choose add digital object. So from here, you can do 3 things. You can start typing the name of the digital object here, and it should start appearing. Or you can browse and create. So if you browse, you'll see all the digital objects within this repository, and you can scroll through them, go to the developable pages, and you can filter the text. I recommend if you are browsing or even like adding these from typing in, copy and paste your identifier. The identifier is your friend because it will pull up the exact digital object you want, because sometimes there are ones with multiple of the same name because it's maybe just unidentified individual, and that's in multiple collections. So the identifier will help you determine that that's the one you want for this archival object. So you can either copy that from the digital object record or copy it from your spreadsheet, whichever works for you. And I usually do this in browse or the type of head. So we're going to search for that, and you'll see that it just pulls up the one digital object record, because like I said, you can't have 2 digital object records with the same identifier. They have to be unique. So then you click link to digital objects, and you can save the archival object, and you will be done. Or you can continue to add digital objects. You can add multiple digital objects to the same archival object, to the same resource, that kind of thing. You can click add here or add there. It really depends. And so if you do have a folder that's just filled with photographs of the same event, and you created an archival object or a digital object, sorry, for each photograph, you can add those here. At a certain point, and at least on your public user side, it will not show all of them as icons. within the archival object record. It will, however, show you it below the fold in the digital materials information part of the record. So at a certain point, it just will stop showing the icons. And I just want to point that out. So we're going to click Add Digital Object again, because I want to show you how to create it from the archival object record. So from here, you can click Create. And you will see a blank record similar to the Create one from when you use the Create drop-down menu. I want to point out that when you create here, you are creating and linking. So you are not creating and then seeing the new record. It's going to link it, and then you'll go back into the archival object. So you can't create complex digital object records from this create. That's a lot of create, but so if you are creating complex digital objects records, it's best to do that from the create menu rather than creating the top level one and then having, so go find it or view it from here and start adding that information. But you do have the ability, if you're just wanting to add it to the resource record, to do that here, and it's a simple one. So you have all the same fields except the ability to create the hierarchy. And when you're done with it, you'll just click Create and Link to Digital Object, and then it will appear here. So after you create it, you can come back into the archival object, and you can click View to see the record. So this will open in view mode and not edit mode. Let's see. I wanted to see if it will show. No, it does not show which archival object is associated with. When you are in a resource record, let me save this. When you're in a resource record, in the hierarchy, it will show you if there's a digital object associated with a different archival object. So that will be shown here, but it won't tell you when you're in a digital object if what one is associated with. You'll have to see that from the resource record. But when you're searching, say if we just typed in, or we, say we search for the identifier, you can see it will pull up that digital archival object because it's associated with it. Generally, it says found in, but that's if you go to digital objects. You can usually find them there too. So it really just depends. It will tell you found in and then where it's found. So this is the archival object it's found in, and then this is the digital object it's associated with. And that depends on how you're searching. So if you're searching by identifier, it will generally pull up the actual items associated with it. But if you're searching by name, it may not pull up. It will pull up that, but it may pull up other records. So that is the basics of a simple digital object record. I wanted to answer any more questions people may have.
Thanks, Brittany. Nothing in the Q&A right now. We'll pause for a moment. And keep in mind the method that Brittany just showed you of linking a digital object to an archival object. If you want to export EAD, that is what you will need to do, is create those simple digital objects either through the digital objects module or by creating them through instances in your archival object. And they will link to your record that way and will export as EAD. When she gets into complex digital objects, those will not export as EAD. So this is something important to think about.
Yeah. And you can add these at different levels of your resource. So you can add them to the series, you can add them to subseries, you can add them to the resource record itself. It really just depends on how you want them to link and how you are describing your materials in ArchivesSpace.
All right. No other questions are coming through in the Q&A, Brittany.
Okay. So that is all I have now about simple objects. I think we're supposed to take a break before getting into complex digital objects.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and take the break. We definitely are anticipating more questions, and maybe they just haven't germinated yet. So we'll go ahead and take a break early. And while we are on break, please, if you have a question or if there's something that you would like to know, please go ahead and drop it into the Q&A. And when we come back, maybe we can answer a couple more questions or help work through a couple more problems. But yeah, we'll go ahead and take our break a little bit early. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll take a 12-minute break. So it's 12:53 my time. So let's come back 5 minutes after the hour. So let's come back it's 1:05 my time. So we'll come back at 5 minutes after the hour. So we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break now. But like I said, go ahead and drop those questions whenever you're ready. We'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, it's 5 minutes after. Brittany, are you back?
I'm here.
You're here, okay. We did get some questions in the chat. Brittany, did you get a chance to look at them? And do you want to go ahead and answer those now?
Sure.
Sounds good. All right. So first question, did I understand correctly that the PUI will only display the first file version URI included in the record, even if there are multiple published file URIs added to that digital object?
So it will display the first file version first. So that will be like the display one, but once you're in the record, you should be able to see all file versions once you're in the digital object record.
Yeah, so if all published file versions will be available in the public user interface, but like, for example, if you wanted to embed a thumbnail, obviously that's the thing you want to show up on in the PUI because you embedded this thumbnail. So that would be the first thing, that the first file URI would be that thumbnail. And then you wanted to link out to the use copy or something like that. That would be the second. And then what would show up in the PUI would be that thumbnail, but when you click on it, the other copy or the other digital object would open up as a separate link, depending on how you have your Xlink attributes set.
Yeah.
And those sort of take some playing around with to get it to look how you want. But if you are an ArchivesSpace member, I definitely would recommend checking out the user manual information about digital objects.
Yes. Yeah, we look at the user manual, but I've also set up local documentation about how to create digital objects for our institution. So people don't have to figure out what Xlink attribute to use for both of those. So that's usually helpful. So if you have multiple people creating digital objects, I definitely recommend creating a manual.
Yeah, internal documentation is definitely important when using ArchivesSpace because you want to make sure people are on the same page. But that is doubly true for digital objects because there are so many different ways to represent them. You want to make sure everyone is doing it the way you've decided as an organization. And if you have any questions, of course, we're all here together today. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of each other, you can put them in the chat. But if you're ever interested in how other people are doing things in ArchivesSpace and you're an ArchivesSpace member, I recommend reaching out to the listserv. People can definitely give you some suggestions there. And if you are specifically interested in like how things display in the PUI, and getting a thumbnail to display is always a very popular topic. I recommend looking, and it's on your agenda. There's a link to it on your agenda. The notes from the last ArchivesSpace trainer office hour, it was specifically about how to do that. So give that a look. Those notes are really useful. Next question. There are 2 MARC representatives in digital object, both of which are published, but only one displays. Is it possible to display both links in the public interface?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that similar to the last question?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you both, if published, will display, but the first one will be the one that displays first, and the make representative won't do anything to that.
It seems like digital objects are commonly made for single digital files, but is there any reason why you wouldn't want to make a digital object to refer to a directory of files, similar to having an archival object refer to the physical order of material? And then some people said, I'm wondering about this as well. And then there are institutions that use digital objects to represent a folder of assets. So that would be, Amy, I think what you're describing is complex digital object, which is what Brittany's going to show us how to do next. There are definite benefits to doing it that way, and then there are some limitations to doing it that way, specifically related to like how you want that data to interact with other data in ArchivesSpace and if you're exporting. So it's a good question. And maybe Brittany, we can, you can dive into complex digital objects and we can answer it a little more after that.
Definitely.
And then would it be possible to link the digital object to ALMA D?
If ALMA is, I feel like ALMA is a library catalog. Excuse me, we don't use it. But
Yeah.
if you have a link to it, you can add that to the file URI and link it to that. So yes, if it has a link, you can do that. Even if it's not a link and you want people to know that it's in ALMA, you can add that to the file version, file URI field.
Yeah, any actionable link will work. And then if you're thinking specifically about digital asset management systems and what will integrate with ArchivesSpace, we do have, and I'll drop the link in the chat when Brittany starts. I'll link out to our webinar series. We did a series on integrations with ArchivesSpace. It is in no way exhaustive, and it is in no way saying these are the only systems you can use, but some of the most frequently requested, does this the application integrate with ArchivesSpace? So there may be some information there if you're looking at different DAMs. I know someone said earlier they're investigating different digital asset management systems. Those webinars may be helpful. So I'll drop that link into the chat in just a second. All right, we're all caught up, Brittany, in the Q&A if you're feeling ready to dive into complex digital objects.
I am. Okay. So you should be seeing the ArchivesSpace homepage. Let me know if I need to zoom in more. But first, I'm going to show you an example that's already in this implementation of a complex digital object. So this is a letter from Julia Child to Jedediah Horcrux Congreve. This is not a real letter, it's just an example. So as you can see from the hierarchy, there's this parent level digital object record, and then there are two children records below it. So similar to resource records, digital object hierarchy is a parent-child sibling relationship kind of thing. So you can see within the parent record, they've built out the data, they've added file version for the whole letter, and then there should be file versions for each individual page associated with those records. There's a language, there's agent records, dates, there's a record link. So you should be able to see. So yes, earlier misspoke, but you should be able to see the record that is associated under the record links section of the digital object record, and that's in view mode. So if you click here, you could see what archival object or record it's associated with, because it could be archival object, resource, accession record that a digital object can link to. You can see notes if there are any notes, and then there's other stuff associated with it. So when building complex digital objects, you have to decide if it's something you want to do first off, and if it's necessary for the digital materials that you are representing in ArchivesSpace and want researchers to view or have access to. So if you decide to do such, there's understanding that all that information will not be exported via EAD, but you could export through MEPs and mods, and you can import various things for digital objects. So with complex digital objects, it's it's not just like, oh, I have a book that's multiple pages and each one are digitized. That's one version of a complex digital object. It could be an image, or you have multiple versions of, like, you have an event series and you want them all in the same digital object record. So you want the parent level of the event itself, and then you want, so that's the name of the folder, and then you want all files in it to have its own record. So those are those children records within the digital object. So if you're creating, say, a Born Digital collection record in here, you can decide whether or not that's going to be a digital object record or a resource record, and how you'll represent that. So you can build out that file structure for your file system that's being used within Born Digital. So this one took the parent record of the overall letter itself and then made records for each one of the pages. And sorry, this is an old record. I just wanted to show you the structure. So it's going to have a few errors. So it's made a record, a child record for each one of the pages. So I'm going to show you how to create that now, and then we'll get further into complex digital objects. So as I said before, creating complex digital objects can't be created via an archival object record or linking to any of them. You can only create simple digital objects. So in order to create a complex one, you can either search for the already created digital object record and add on to it, or you can create a whole new one from the create menu. We're going to create a new one for now. Just quickly create a general record here, the Jane Doe biography. And add an identifier. We're not going to publish it now. So if this was at the AUC, we would build this record out. We would add language, dates, right statement, any notes to it. But for us, the file version, we wouldn't add a link to this parent record. The parent record would just be the metadata, and then the children would have those file versions for each page or each item added to this record. But you can add the file version here, obviously, and you can have the file version that's the whole thing. So you can add that here, and then have a file, a URI or file path or whatever for the individual pages or items. I'm going to save this as is, so I can just show you how to build out that hierarchy. So after you save it, you see that there's enable reorder mode, there's rapid data entry, and there's add child. So we're going to click add child, and that's going to open up a digital object component. So this digital object, like the records that are the children are referred to as component records. So they're not digital, because the overall record is a digital object record. So in able to distinguish between them, these are called component records. So you'll see that the basic information has changed a little. You now have a label and a title, but nothing is necessarily required. There's a conditional requirement for these. So you either add a title or you add a label. You can add an identifier, but it is not required at this for the component records. So if you add a title, you don't need a label. If you add a label, you don't need a title, that kind of thing. The label can be, this is like page 1, and you want to make note of that here. And you can add the title of that page, or you can leave it blank. You can add identifier. I want to point out that you can have identifiers with underscores and periods. I misspoke earlier. So if you have underscores in your identifiers for your digital materials, you can copy and paste those here. So if there is an identifier for this, so it's like page _1, or if it's bio _1, you can add that here, but it's not required. And then you just build it out. If your title is a date, you can add that similar to archival object records to the dates field, and then you don't have to have a title or a label because you've added a date as a title. So that will function as the title. You can add languages, extents, can add that file version. So when you do that, it's still the same as in a simple digital object. You still just have to add the URI, which is the link or file path or words associated with how to find this record. So that is, you would do that, and you would continue to build it out, and then you could see it on the other end. So I'm going to actually build out one that's associated with my spreadsheet here. So in here we have Atlanta maps. So these are the Atlanta region 1970 census tracts, and we have different versions of these maps, but they're associated with the same like archival object that we have, the same folder in our collection. So we want to create that. So we're going to create the new digital object, and we're going to add the census tract here. I'm going to copy the identifier that we have associated with it here and paste in an identifier. And we would add any metadata information we want, but we're not going to do that now because I just want to show you how this will look on the public side. So we're going to add the child of each version of this map. I would like to point out, and I'll show you this in a second, once you've created a child, you can create a child of that child and a sibling. So you can just keep going all the way down until you don't want to do it anymore. So it can get as granular as needed. So you can have a page in a book, and then the section of the book may be photographed, or you may digitize just a section of that page, and you want that noted in the hierarchy. So you can just keep going. If you have a file system on your computer that has folders within folders within folders, you can keep adding those as records within this digital object record. So let me get the identifier here and add that here. And we're going to just call this, label this as item 1. Then we're going to add the file version. And we're going to choose our X-link attributes, and we're going to publish these, make sure they get published. If you choose publish all, when you're done creating this record and its component records, it will publish the component record. So you don't have to worry about going into each component record and checking the publish or clicking publish all at the top of it. It will publish those. Okay. And then when you're done creating your digital object component record, you can choose to just save it as is, or you can add a new one. So the +1 will bring up a blank component record, and it will save this one at the same time. And then you're able to just keep going and adding them. So we're going to add the next one. And the identifier, and the label, publish, and the file version. Please publish here. And then add the X-link attributes. And then we're going to just save this one as is and not add any more. But when you have added component records, as I said, you'll see that you can add children to this. So you can just keep adding component records to the overall digital object record, or you can add siblings like we have been doing. So you'll see that you have 2 items within the census tract map, and you can view published at any level of this. So we'll click this for item 1. And you will see that you have, actually similar to a resource record, you now have this like organization on the side. So you'll see the main digital object record up top here, and you'll see different items underneath it. So it will show you that hierarchy on the side here, but it also gives you the breadcrumbs. So if you want to know what the parent digital object record was, you can click on that here and get to the parent one. And if it has a file URI associated with it, it will appear as the same as simple digital objects. So as the item one, it would be here, but it doesn't have to in order to be published and be on the public side. So if we click on this, you'll be able to see all the information associated with it. Click on it and open up a new file record, which will show you that item. So this one, I chose the right link. This one is item one, and you'll see within our digital asset management system, we have them associated. So that's why it makes sense to us at ArchivesSpace to have both objects or items within the same digital object record, so that so people can see that they are related to each other and they are part of the same folder within the Archival object, because that's how they are represented within the resource record we created for it. Yeah, so that is one way to use the complex digital objects. If you wanted, you could continue to add more items. You can add pages, you can just keep going. But you don't want to just keep clicking +1 or save and add child or add sibling. You want a quicker way to do it just within ArchivesSpace itself. That's where the rapid data entry comes in. So rapid data entry here is very similar to rapid data entry in resource records. So, but the fields are different because this is digital object record. This is only appears once you create a simple digital object. So that way you can create multiple component records for it. So you'll see that there's 36 columns associated with it. You can go through and get rid of the ones you don't want to see. Just language script. You decide you don't want to add date to these, so you're gonna uncheck all of those, the extent. So all those subrecords and then the various fields associated with them appear as columns within the rapid data entry. You can choose which file version fields you want to see and which ones you want to add. And then when you're done doing this, you can save this as a template. And that way, whenever someone is creating a complex digital object within ArchivesSpace, you will have that template that you want people to use already saved, and they'll just have to load it. I will show you what you can do to like save this here in a second. But yeah, you can just basically get rid of all the columns or hide all the columns you don't want to see, and then make it much easier to add data because you're not seeing things you don't want to use. Anything that is blue is sticky, which means when you add another row, the information in these columns will remain the same in the next row. So if it's not the same information, you don't want those to be sticky. It's very similar to the resource record and how it functions, how this rapid data entry functions. It's just different columns because of the different type of records. So if you want to save this as a template, you can just say save template. You can give it a name. So you can say complex DOs and save the template. And then when someone is in ArchivesSpace working on complex digital objects, they can choose the template and it will appear and it will keep those sticky columns that you saved. So if you didn't want the sticky columns, you can unstick them and just have the ones you want to keep sticky. And then you can save the template again or remove or keep it as is. So we're just going to fill this out with various things. So we're going to say this is making things up. So if you see red, it means error, but you can also validate the rows to get rid of the red. So when it becomes green, it means there's no errors, but red is always associated with errors in ArchivesSpace. And you can add multiple rows as you want. I recommend when doing rapid data entry to not go past like 20 or so, because if you close out of this, if your get logged out of ArchivesSpace, if you leave your computer and something happens, it doesn't save it for you. You have to click Save Rows for it to save it. So you basically lose all that data, all that stuff you were entering, and then you have to re-enter it, and that just becomes a hassle. And here in a moment or so, I'm going to show you how to do something easier that's outside of ArchivesSpace, so you don't have to worry about saving it in ArchivesSpace. So if you wanted to add multiple rows, you can add I hate when that happens. You can add multiple rows at the same time. You can add 2, 3, 4. Generally, when you're here, you can type in the number and it will add that many rows. So we're just going to add 3 at a time. Okay, and then you can validate first to make sure it will save it and it's fine, or you can just save it and hope for the best if you know that you've entered all the information. So when you choose rapid data entry, you'll see that it added all of those to this child here. So they became component records for item 1. So whichever record you have highlighted when choosing rapid data entry is where it will add the records as children of that record. So if we were on the parent record and you wanted to add all the pages there, you could choose rapid data entry and it would do so there. And that way you can add multiple at the same time without having to click save or +1 and that kind of thing. I don't think I published these, but I'm going to choose publish all. And I'll show you again what this looks like on the public side once it actually, there we go. So you'll see that you have all the component records associated with it shown on the public side as long as they have been published, and you get to see that hierarchy. So if you want to create hierarchy again, as I said, you can do so, and you can see the digital object organization here on the side and be able to navigate through it. You don't currently have the ability to search through it, unfortunately, but you can navigate and you can search for these items within digital materials within the whole public user interface, like the whole instance. So you are able to do that. You just can't search when you're in it. But similar to how you could search in a collection, you can't do that with digital objects currently. So before I move on, are there any questions about complex digital objects?
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, a couple things to point out about rapid data entry, or to reiterate what Brittany said. Save as you go. Don't try to do everything in one go, because if you walk away and go to lunch and ArchivesSpace times out, you'll lose everything, or something happens and you lose 100 rows. So the suggestion of 20, I think, is about right. So just make sure you save as you go. And then she showed that you could create Rde templates so that next time you don't have to go in and unclick all of those fields that you don't need, or maybe you could give a student worker that template and they could handle it. Those templates are viewable across repositories. So if you're in an institution that has multiple repositories within it, make sure you title it something so that you know it's your department. So call it like Rare Books Digital Objects Template or something like that, so that you know that it's yours, because those are shareable across across repositories. And then we had a question in the chat, Brittany. Can you show how you control the order and sorting of the component objects? Could you maybe show, I think enable reorder mode is what they're asking for.
Yeah, definitely. So this is similar to resource records. You would click enable reorder mode, and then everything but the parent record, you have the ability to move. So you can select it, you can choose to cut it and then paste it elsewhere, or you can just drag and drop. So you can say you want item 1 after item 2. You can do that here, or you want to add it as a child. You can also do that. So we'll say add items after, and you'll see that all item 1 and its associated component records were moved to after item 2. But you want page 1 to be actually a at the same level as item 1 and 2. So you can move it, and you can decide to add it before, add it as a child item 2. So we're going to say add it before, and you see that it got moved out of item 1 and became its own record separate from item 1. So it's at the same level as item 2 and item 1. If we wanted to make page 2 a part of item 2, we can choose add items as children. You can choose multiple at the same time. So if you want to move multiple at the same time, you can select them by clicking and then using control, a holding control button. Oh, how did I do that? Select, control, yeah. So you select them by clicking on the first one and then holding the control button and then selecting the next one. So you can usually select multiple at the same time, and then you can move them. And it will move both of them and their associated children with them. So that there's a way to do that. And then if you want to just use the buttons, you can say cut, and then it will gray it out. You can select the one you want it to go and choose paste. It will, well, yeah, let me choose this one. I think there may be a bug. I don't know what just happened just now, but enable reorder mode has disappeared. Okay,
Yep.
Let's see if that fixes it. Nope, I still don't see it.
Where did you go?
I don't know what happened, but I recommend not using cut and paste for the moment. Just move things around. Of course, in order to, when working correctly, to get out of enable reorder mode, you would just click disable reorder mode, and it will take you back to the record in view mode, and you can choose to edit it. And luckily it did save this. It will save it how you reordered it. So you are able to reorder, and it will save it after disable reorder mode is clicked. So if you put something in the wrong place, you can always enable reorder mode and use it. But if it's a large one, you may want to consider, because you can choose multiple items at a time to move, but you may want to try a different workaround to editing and moving it. But it really depends on how large the record is, or how many items or component records it has.
All right. Thanks, Brittany.
Yeah.
Can a digital object component be linked to an archival object as an instance?
No. When you link a digital object, you link the parent record, and any component records associated will be linked as well, but you can't link them separately.
That's why it's pretty common to see instances that have a whole bunch of simple digital objects, because every individual item is created as its own digital object so that it can be linked as an instance. So if you have a resource record, like you have a collection that has a ton of digital surrogates, and you want to link them, then you're probably going to be wanting to create individual simple archival objects instead of building out the hierarchy within the digital object module. That hierarchy would exist in the resource module, and you just have a bunch of simple digital objects.
Yeah, I can show you what that looks like. So if you go back to Jane Doe papers, we'll go to the maps here, and we'll add an instance of digital objects. So we're going to add the Atlanta census tracts, if I could spell. There we go. And if once we save it, we'll view published version of this, so you can see what that looks like on the public side. Can we publish all? Always takes a second on ArchivesSpace. I had high hopes. Okay, well, I'll show you that, guys, in a minute. Are there any other questions while I wait for this to load?
No questions in the Q&A, but going back to Amy's question about why wouldn't you want to make a digital object that has a file directory? I think that this was a good example of that. If you especially like digital surrogates or things where you really want to link that digital instance to your resource record or to your archival object, that would be an example of when it doesn't serve your purposes to create a complex digital object. But maybe if you're working with a born digital collection and you have a creator's hard drive and that thing has all kinds of hierarchy going on, it probably makes more sense to create a complex digital object to represent that instead of simple digital objects. So it really depends on your use cases and what you want to accomplish in ArchivesSpace.
Yeah, and just to point out, like, you could potentially build the whole born digital collection in digital object records, but it doesn't give you the same data sub-records as a resource record. So you don't have that finding a data fields. You don't have the same basic information where you can describe that it's a collection. So it may still be beneficial to create a resource record and link it to the digital object record that you've created for that hierarchy, just so people understand that it's a collection and have all that collection level information.
I think that's what you do at the AUC, right, Brittany?
Yeah, we create a regular finding aid, and then within instances, rather than saying a container instance, we say it's a digital object instance, and this is where it's located on our servers. People don't see that information; they just see the file name and the identifier, but we have the path if we need to know. And that just makes sure we have all the collections in one place rather than throughout our ArchivesSpace instance. So I wanted to quickly show you what it looks like when you look at a complex digital object. So this is a regular archival object. You can see that it doesn't show the digital object here, but if the top level, parent level record had a digital object and you were in the regular archival object record on the PUI, you would see that here. You would see the red box here. I just want to point that out. You would not see all of them, only a few. So you can see that it's still just saying that there's one digital object record, because that's true. There's only one, but it has component records. So you would have to go into the actual record to see that it has component records, because in the archival object record, it doesn't tell you that. It just shows you the link to the overall record. So just want to, so if you want people to know there are multiple records associated with it, and you can keep them separate as separate digital object records, so they can click on all of them and see the links without having to navigate through the hierarchy. But it really depends on you and your institution. And that's all I have for that. Are there any more questions?
Someone said, do you ever use the Harvard plugin spreadsheet? So that's the load via spreadsheet option, and it has digital objects. And we're going to go over that in importing later on in the workshop, right, Brittany?
Yes.
But
I'll show you how to.
Oh, sorry. But I'll point out that what Brittany is going to show you is load via spreadsheet, which it is the Harvard plugin spreadsheet, but as of ArchivesSpace version 2.8, the Harvard plugin is now part of core code in ArchivesSpace, so it's no longer a plugin. It functions very similarly. You still have the load via spreadsheet button. There's a little bit of added functionality that isn't part of the plugin, and if you're using version 2.8.1 or later, There's actually a validator. So there are a lot of improvements for using the spreadsheet importer if you're using the plugin, so you may want to consider upgrading, but we are going to go over that. But just since everyone here probably is using a different version of ArchivesSpace, if you're using something earlier than 2.8, it's a plugin. What Brittany's going to show you is not a plugin, because the most recent versions of ArchivesSpace is part of core code.
Yeah, so if you want to use it, or if you are using it, I would recommend, considering upgrading to at least 2.8, or actually the newest version. Just go ahead and upgrade to the newest version if you want the load via spreadsheet.
So we're getting some questions about load via spreadsheet, about can it create digital object components? Maybe we'll save that question until you start going over the different ways you can import digital objects, Brittany. So we'll save that question.
Yeah.
No other questions coming in through the chat right now, or through the Q&A.
Okay. So yeah, I will point out that if you were curious about creating complex digital objects and you want to test it out for yourself, there are those exercises in the workbook, and I recommend doing those on your own time to see how you like it. I recommend testing out any of this you've learned today just to see if that's what you want to do at your institution. So yeah, complex digital objects can be confusing, and it really just depends on how you plan to use it. And I say this all the time, but you can make digital objects as simple or as hard as you want them to be. We try to keep them simple at the AUC just because we have multiple people working on them. And we just want to make sure we have a link to the digitized materials. That's really what we want ArchivesSpace to do for us. So we don't try to make it super complicated.
Thanks, Brittany. All right. Just looking at our agenda and our time and everything. And Brittany, if you already went over this, I'm so sorry. One of, or two of the things that we had marked on the agenda was talking about how to link agent and subject records to digital objects. Did you demonstrate that and I missed it? Or I just want to make sure we cover it if we haven't already.
I did not do that because I forgot. I apologize. And I can do that now.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to navigate back to Josephine Dibble Murphy. I don't know why I'm trying to spell her name. And we're going to edit this article, this digital object. So in the process of creating your digital object records, you have the ability to add agents and links. I did talk about this, I just did not add them. So when you're in the record, you can scroll down and you see that you can add the agent links and you can add subjects. You can have multiples of each. At a certain point, like after 5, you'll have to click to load within the record itself, and it won't just appear when you're in this record, so because of just keeping the system going. So when you're in the agent link sub-record, it's similar to how you would add them to resource records, accessions, different records. You choose the role, and you choose if it's a relator for it, and the agent. So the only required fields are the role and agent, the agent link itself. So the agent record itself, sorry. So we're gonna say that this was the subject. So if a person or organization or family is the subject of the record, it still is linked under agent links. So that's how you link people and organizations. Topical, geographical, those kind of things are linked under subject. So you wouldn't add the names under subject. You would choose the role as subject rather than go to subject subrecord. Just want to point that out in case anyone's confused by that. So you can decide here if you want to add a relator, like it's the actor, animator, applicant. You have so many to choose here. It really depends on if your institution uses this field of agent records. So, and then you choose the agent link. So we have the ability to type ahead here, browse, and then create. So if you were to create, you would go into that type of record and you would add all the information and do it. agents have changed since version 3.0, so we're not going to create one today. We are going to browse and choose from the browse list. I'm just going to choose a random name because I did not add Josephine Dillon Murphy to this. So you can, in this, similar to how you would browse through other things, you can filter the text, you can go through the pages, and you can choose multiple at the same time. We're just going to choose one. Because if you are adding multiple, I recommend adding multiple of the sub-records to indicate what type of agent they are, like what type of link this is. We're going to choose link to agents. And then you can add term or subdivision for it since it is a subject, but you don't have to. That is an option. You can continue to add more of them. And then that is how you would link the agent. I will say that if this agent isn't published in its record, then it won't appear when this digital object is published. So you want to make sure that it is, because these get published outside of the record they're being added to, because they're separate records being created. Subjects is not the same way. Those automatically published whenever the record itself is published. So agents just function that way, and just want to point that out. Similar to how if you link a digital object to a resource record and it's not published, it will not appear in the findings page or on the PUI. So, and then once you're done adding agent links, you can add subjects and other fields. So we're going to add subjects now. You can browse, create, type a head here. We're going to browse. We're going to look for a photograph just to be annoying. We're going to say this 20th century photograph. And if you want multiple, just regular photographs, color prints, you can link all of those. You can also clear out the filter and still have these checked and then search for more. So we're going to just link these for now and then type ahead. Women education. So you can just continue to add them and it will link these to the record. So once you're done with that, you just save the record. We have this published, so when you view this, we wait a minute for it actually to have that information associated with it. I don't care for how long it takes. Well, when you view the public side, it should show that information, but it takes a second with the ArchivesSpace PUI just to load the information. But you should, once you have added it, you should see the indicators on the side showing you how many agents you've added and linked to this and how many subjects you've linked to this. So you have the ability to do that, and it helps with access points. So it gives you those control points to just be able to search those. So if someone is on the public side here and they go to subjects and they look for photographs, they can find that digital material associated with it. So I'm not going to do that now, but I will say that if people are searching based on subjects and names, they have the ability to find the digital object record also, as well as the archival object record and resources and anything else that is associated with those names and subjects. So it's just another way to link records to each other and create ways for your researchers to find them within the ArchivesSpace PUI. And I hope that made sense, but I will obviously answer questions about the agents and subject record linking.
Thanks, Brittany. I think we just wanted to highlight that to point out that it is possible. And it's just like a resource record or an accession record within ArchivesSpace. You can add subjects and agents just to a digital object just the same way. A couple things to keep in mind about subjects and agents. Those are two record types that are shared across repositories. So again, if you have multiple repositories at your institution and you assign a subject or an agent to your record, and someone searched by that subject or agent, all of the records in every repository will show up for that. And then another thing to point out specifically about agents. Brittany pointed this out. If you have an agent who is a subject, they are still an agent, but just with the role of subject. And this doesn't even relate to digital objects. It's just a cleanup project that I have had to do, and it is very painful. Make sure that you are not adding people, agents, as subjects. They are still agents, even if their role is subject. So I wanted to make sure to point that out as well. We do have a question in the Q&A. Could you share some links to examples of successful implementations of the digital objects module? If anyone is here and using digital objects and they would care to share their PUI, if they're using the PUI and would like to drop that in the chat, please feel free. Also, I'll drop this into the chat. We have a page called Who's Using ArchivesSpace on our website. And for people that have volunteered to have their ArchivesSpace PUI linked there are some links there that you can check out. And then, of course, if you are an ArchivesSpace member, please don't hesitate to ask the listserv for examples if anyone's using the digital objects module, and they would be willing to share their PUI. And then, Brittany, maybe you'd be willing to share AUCs as well.
Yeah, I can do that. I can get to it fairly quickly right now. Okay, let me go to our actual finance page. So this is the AUC public user interface that we have. It is customized. This is not out of the box. So we added a lot of things to it. But for us, we do have the tab available for our digital materials. We also just have a link that people can use to get to our digital collections website here on the home page. So when clicking on that, people will see a complete listing of our digital materials. When they can see an alphabetical order, they can reorder it, that kind of thing. And when they go into one, let me see, they have the ability to access information about it, similar to how it looks on the out of the box font. And then this link will go to our digital collections website. So we have a good number here, but this does not represent all of our digital materials. These are just the ones we've created digital object records for. And we don't embed thumbnails, I will put that out, but we do add write statements to ours, so we call them permissions, and we just tell people to contact us. The ability to create citations, see the link to records. It's fairly straightforward. We use it the simplest way we can, so yeah. Oh, I do want to point this out. We actually created a video on how to use it. So in our help page and on a LibGuide we created a video on how to search for digital materials within our ArchivesSpace instance. So how to do the general search from the home page, how to find it within a finding aid, and how to use the tab at the top. So we have found that this is very handy, but if they have more questions, there's also a LibGuide, a part of a research guide that we created that goes over digital materials in ArchivesSpace. So yeah, the pandemic led to a lot of more resources for how to find digital materials. So I hope that just shows you something you can do with the PUI and digital objects.
Thanks, Brittany. Are you creating digital collections independent of archival objects, resource records, or are all digital objects linked to your resource records?
So they are all linked. So the only time they wouldn't be is if for some reason we're digitizing materials from an unprocessed collection. But even then, we just usually create a sub-record for that collection and link via that. But usually, majority of our records are linked to an archival object record. And if they're not, we're in the process of doing that. So they're all from mainly processed collections.
Cool. Thanks for showing us.
Yeah.
All right. No questions in the Q&A right now, and we are at about break time. So we'll go ahead and take our break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about importing and exporting, what everyone's been waiting for. So we'll go ahead and take an 11-minute break, and we will come back at 10 minutes after the hour to wrap things up. So if you have any questions, drop them into the chat or to the Q&A during break time, but we'll be back at 10 minutes after the hour. All right, welcome back, everybody. It is 10 minutes after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our last little bit of this training. We did get a question that came into the Q&A during the break, and if anyone has any input on it, please do put it into the chat. But Lisa asks, is anyone using digital objects for oral histories? We have digital files for the following: the recording, the transcript, and a photo. I'm struggling with creating an archival object for each item and then a digital object attached as an instance for each one, or create a single archival object for the oral history and then attach multiple digital object instances for the recording, transcript, and photo. The Nicholas offers, I don't have a public example to share, but the way we handle that in our institution is to host those files together in our digital asset management system, then create a simple digital object in ASpace that links to the item record there. Also, like the digital object, also, I think, link the digital object and the archival object in ASpace. So if anyone else has any examples that they'd like to share, please add on to that thread there. And then Lisa, another great place to pose this question, it's a really good question, is on the ArchivesSpace listserv, and see if we get any more bites from members there, because that's a really good question that I don't necessarily have a suggestion for. Maybe Brittany, you have something.
Yeah, we just create the simple digital object record in ArchivesSpace that links to our DAMs that holds all the information, similar to what was said. So that way it's simple in ArchivesSpace, but then our Indoor instance has all the information about the oral history. So yeah, but you could do it either way, but it really depends on where you think people will see the information first, and how you want them to see the information.
Good point, Brittany. All right. Okay, so people, I'm going to copy some links that are getting shared to the panelists in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and share them with everyone in just a second. And then Brittany, if you want to go ahead and get started talking about importing and exporting digital objects.
Yeah, so we'll start with importing. We'll start with importing a CSV file, and then we'll get into load via spreadsheet. So to import a CSV file, which I have here, this is shown as a Google spreadsheet, but this is the CSV file we will be uploading. You will go to create, and then background job. Yeah. Oh, wait, what am I trying? I don't know why. No. Oh, import data. Sorry, it's been a while since I used background stuff. So you'll go to create, and then you'll go to background job, and then you'll go to import data. And that allows you to import data for multiple record types, not just digital objects. So from here, you will choose the import type. For digital objects, there's only one. There's the digital object CSV, because you don't import the spreadsheet, the load via spreadsheet template here. You don't do that one here. This is just a regular CSV. And if you want this template, it is available in the user manual. You can choose to drag or drop files here, or you can just click add file. So we're going to navigate to, once that opens, to my desktop and open up the folder and choose this import. And then we're going to start job. So it will start a background job. It will add it to the queue. Once it is started, it will start doing it. And depending on how many digital objects you are doing, it will take either a few seconds or a few minutes. So give it a chance to do it before you give up on it and cancel the job. So if it's completed, it will either tell you that the job failed or give you the green and say it's good. You can see a log of what happened, such as the records that were created and how it was done. You can refresh the page once you're good, and you can see all the new and modified records that were created. So when you are creating a digital object record via the CSV, you also can create other records. So this creates agent records and subject records to be associated with these digital object records. So we'll click on one of these to show you. And this is one of the digital object records that was imported from the CSV. So it has the basic information field. It has a file URI that you can see here in the view mode, because it's just showing you that. That's neat. And then it has the dates, the agent links that came with it that were created, as well as subject headings that were created and added to your ArchivesSpace instance. So when you import data into ArchivesSpace, please be aware that you may import more than what you thought you were importing. So you could import those agents. You can even import container information, depending on the type of import you are working with. For digital objects, you have the ability to do agents and subjects, as well as the digital object itself. So if you go back into the background job, you can see all the other records, but you can also just search for them within your ArchivesSpace implementation. These are just created for that repository. As you know, digital objects are based on repositories. So if you are importing, just make sure you're in the right repository if you work within multiple. So that is importing via CSV. Fairly straightforward. As I said, the template is available, but it's just really just these tagged fields. And you can, I would not edit this, and I'm going to go over that with load via spreadsheet. I would just hide fields you don't want to use. So don't delete them, just hide them, and then add information to each field. And it has a field associated with all of the possible subrecords within digital object records. Let me see, this one, someone had a question about creating component records. So this one, the CSV has the component as a part of, no, that's has various things a part of it. I will say that I don't import component records. So if I'm creating complex records, I have to create that in ArchivesSpace. There are ways to work around that, but I don't have those. And the load via spreadsheet, based on my knowledge of it, does not give that ability, because you're adding them to archival objects. And I'm going to show you in a minute what that looks like. But does anyone have any questions about the CSV files and importing the CSV?
Yeah, so some questions just about the CSV. So I dropped into the chat a link to all of the data maps that ArchivesSpace makes available, including the digital object CSV file that Brittany just showed. So you can download that template and make sure that you are using that template when you're trying to upload digital objects, or really anytime you're trying to import via CSV. You need to make sure you're using the template, not just, you know, your CSV file, because it uses that template to map to the appropriate fields. So that's where that file that Brittany just showed, that's where it came from, and that's where it's available. You can use what Brittany just showed, that load via, or sorry, nope, not load via spreadsheet. The digital object CSV, you can use that to create complex digital objects, import complex digital objects. You cannot, like Brittany said, you cannot, and she hasn't shown it yet, you cannot use the load via spreadsheet to import complex digital objects. And she'll show in just a minute there, you also do not use a background job like you normally would to import a CSV to load via spreadsheet, the formerly known as Harvard import tool. You do that differently. So what Brittany just showed is the CSV template that's available to everyone on that link that I just provided in the chat.
Yeah. So now we're going to go over load via spreadsheet, what you all been waiting for. So let me navigate to a resource record, the one we were working on earlier. We're going to edit a Jane Doe paper. And then let me just show you what the import looks like. So this is the template that I have here in my Google Drive. To access this, you would go to the GitHub for ArchivesSpace, and there are all the templates for digital objects and just for adding archival objects to your resource record. The digital object template, which Jessica can share the link for these templates as well. The digital object template is to associate and link digital objects to archival objects within a resource record. So these archival objects are already created. So if you're digitizing a collection for a process collection that has a finding aid in ArchivesSpace, you would use the spreadsheet to add those digital objects, which is why I'm saying this is a much easier way than creating your own version of the spreadsheet and individually adding each digital object, because you can add multiple at one time to a single resource. So in order to do this, you need either the EAD ID for that collection. Okay, there we go. So you would have the EAD ID for the resource or the URI for that resource in ArchivesSpace. So if you don't have the EAD, you use the URI. You need the ref ID for the archival object or the URI for the archival object. So it's either or, but you need one or the other in order for it to link to that. You can then add your digital object ID. There's a note here saying that you can actually leave this blank. So the identifier is a required field, but ArchivesSpace will create one based on the ref ID of that archival object if you want it to. So if you don't want to create your own unique identifier, it will do it. And that would be the default to do that. If you want for us, our identifiers are file names without like the extension on the end. So that way we know it's the same identifier throughout the life of that digital object, and it's digital, digitized content. So that way we create our own, but for here, you don't have to if you're using a spreadsheet. You would add the title. You can choose whether or not to publish it. So it'll allow you to choose true or false. You can add the link, the file URI, and it has a default here where it sets it to Actuate is on request and show is on new. So if you use different Xlink attributes, you may not want to use the spreadsheet because those aren't the ones that are the default. The other ones aren't defaulted here. And then you can also add a thumbnail URI. So if you'd rather have a thumbnail rather than a regular digital object with just the icon, you can do that. And it is Actuate of onload and show as embed. So the spreadsheet gives you not a lot of wiggle room, but you have the ability at least to link them to archival objects and have that data in ArchivesSpace. So if you're just creating simple digital objects and wanting them to link to your archival objects and then link out to your DAMs or your file server or wherever you have them, the spreadsheet may be the way to go because it's just quick and you could just keep adding. I will point out that if you are using the resource archival object load via spreadsheet template, you have the ability to add digital objects there. You have even less fields, I believe, or these may be the same one. I have to look at it, but you have fields in there to add file versions and the digital object title and ID, so you can link them already when you're creating the spreadsheet for adding archival objects to digital objects. So both spreadsheets have that in there, but this one is specific to adding the digital objects. And now I will show you one I've created, and then we're going to add it to a fun resource, the Krispy Kreme records. So I went ahead and created a few digital objects here. I've just created like 5. So I've added my own ID, but you see the EAD ID, the ref ID, the digital object identifier, the title, we want it to publish, and then we just have a file URI. We're not using a thumbnail. So I'm going to go back to the Jane Doe papers, and we're going to click on Load via Spreadsheet. From here, you will choose Add Digital Objects to Archival Objects rather than Import Archival Objects. Import Archival Objects is just the default highlighted one. You can choose to just validate your file, which will take you into the background job, and then you can see the log of it to make sure it's fine. Then there won't be any error. Or you can just import it. So we're going to select the file. We're going to select bulk import test. Let's open that up. And we're going to import from Spreadsheet. We're going to click that. It will take you into a background job. You just can't access this via background job. It has to be from the resource record you're adding it to. So we see that the log is done. We see that I have errors, so this is going to work. Let's see. Actually, just going to download this. Okay. Do that one more time. I'm sorry. Too many times. Okay. I don't know. Okay, so you see via error messages that it's missing an EAD ID. So those, I might be too short. But this, for some reason, is telling me that. It hasn't. Ah, I chose the wrong resource. Let's go to Krispy Kreme and not Jane Doe, like I want to add this to. I'll eventually figure this out. Go into edit here. Load via Spreadsheet. Select the file. Add digital objects to archival objects and import via Spreadsheet. This one should work. We'll see the background job running. You'll see that it's created the digital objects and added them to the archival objects, and then you'll refresh the page. And you'll see all the ones that were created and what archival objects they were linked to. So if we click on this one, these icons are the archival objects, and this refers to digital objects. And if you hover over it, it usually tells you that. So if we click on the archival object and go there, you'll see that it now has a digital object instance associated with it. And we can scroll down, go down to that and see what was added. And you can view it and see the information associated with it and what was added from the spreadsheet. As I said, these are very simple, straightforward. It will just be file version URI and the identifiers and title. If you want a thumbnail, you can add that as well, but it's not going to be a ton of information, so it won't be a full metadata. If you want to add dates, notes, agents, subjects, you can go in and edit this and can do that. But then you're just having to edit all your records. So it really depends on how you plan to use the digital object module if the spreadsheet works for you. If you're keeping it simple and just title and links, it is a good way to go. And of course, make sure you're choosing the right EAD ID when creating the record. If you don't use EAD IDs, like if you're in here and you're in finding a data, that's where you would add that EAD ID. But if you don't have this because it's not a required field within a resource record, that's when you would use the resource URI instead of the EAD ID within the template. So here. Does anyone have any questions about importing digital objects on the spreadsheet?
Thanks, Brittany. Will the set ref ID function be applicable to the digital object spreadsheet? I think the question there is that ref ID required for the digital object CSV? And the answer to that would be no.
No. Yeah, no, because you're not linking in that one, you're just creating them. So yeah, this one doesn't have, based on my knowledge, it doesn't have those linking.
For the load via spreadsheet, Harvard import tool, whatever you want to call it, you are required to include either the EAD ID or the ref ID, because that is what ArchivesSpace will use to make that connection. It needs that information so that it knows what resource it's adding this information to. So that's why either or of those are required.
Yeah, because then it won't be able to link, and then you'll get errors and it won't do it. So that, as I showed you, you need to make sure it's added and it's correct. So I recommend copy and pasting from your resource record. I also want to point out that, as I said with the CSV template, do not delete anything besides this line up here. This is only one, and it tells you up here that you can use something else, like you can call this the collection name or whatever, but anything below it, either just hide. Don't delete, just hide. That way it doesn't cause errors when uploading it.
Yeah, that's true for all of the templates. And the next, there's a question after, how can you add more columns to the digital object template for more metadata for digital objects? If you're using that specific template, manipulating the columns will change how the information maps to different fields. So I would not recommend doing that, especially if it's maybe, I mean, you're welcome to try it. I would say you can try anything, but be prepared that it may not work if you're using these specific templates.
Yeah, and these are, I feel like these are mapped to EAD, so that's, if you're good with that, you can try, but we recommend not deleting anything and not really adding anything unless you're just testing it out. Okay, so if there are no more questions about load via spreadsheet, I can move on to exporting, which is an S1. I'm sorry. So let's navigate to a digital object. This one I have here. So we have the Alabama Mobile Government Street Cochran photos, and we want to export the data about it out of ArchivesSpace. In ArchivesSpace, you have several options for exporting data. When we refer to the EAD that's being exported, that's what you can export with your resource records and such. So that's generally what we're referring to. So if you export your resource record and you want the digital object information, you're not going to get everything associated with that digital object. You're just going to get the simple digital object information. So we just like to point that out. You are able to export metadata via Dublin Core, mods records, and METS records. If you want the metadata, all the stuff comprising a digital object, you probably want a mods record because it will give you that component level metadata. So when you go up here and you click export, you have download mods, download METS, and download Dublin Core. So when you click on any of these, it will download an XML file for the digital object record so that you are currently in. So it won't download it for all of them. It's just the one you're in. And if it has component records, depending on the one you choose, it will download information about those as well. So you'll just click download. It will download the XML. For some reason, the application I have to view XML is not working, but when you open it, you will be able to see the mod fields associated with this digital object record. You also have the option to download METs. When doing METs records, you can get the component level metadata as well as information associated with the content file, like in the file version of the record. And you need to choose whether you want it in mods or Dublin Core, like you want METs to use mods or Dublin Core. So it really depends on what kind of data you want for that metadata, the scripted metadata and such. So you'll choose one and then you'll just come back and click on it. And you can have export data on either one really for the METs record. And then you can just straight up download Dublin Core. And that is only parent level metadata. So if you have a complex digital object, it's not going to give you information about that. It's only going to give you the parent level information of the record. And similar to all the other ones, it will download a XML file. These will be, the file names of them will be the identifier for that parent record plus the date of when it was downloaded. So as you can see, it has that identifier here and then it starts out with a date. So that's how these are generally named, and you'll see that when you download the information. There are other ways of exporting data and bulk importing and bulk exporting and bulk editing, but that involves stuff that we're not going to go over today in the workshop. If you're interested in API stuff, I recommend going and looking up that documentation and seeing what you can do with digital objects via the API, sending information via the user group listserv. It's always helpful for getting information about like using API and digital objects. Because you may run into issues or you may need to do bulk editing and want to do that, but it's hard to do that just in the staff interface as is. You want to go to the back end. You can also export reports on digital objects, and those are just simple tables and then a list of the digital objects and file version. So you would go back to background jobs, click create report, and then you can see the list on the side here and over scroll through, and you'll see there's a digital object table that includes the title, identifier, and then information about the linked resources. And then there's the file version list, and you choose the digital objects and get the file version of that. So there are a few reports that you can use, but it really depends on what kind of data you're trying to export and what for that you use the exporting features of a digital object. So yeah, that is exporting. And does anyone have any any questions about digital objects and exporting them?
Well, if anyone has any information too, that'd be great. Yeah, and I'm gonna drop into the chat a link. If you are interested in doing just some really big bulk work with digital objects or really with anything in ArchivesSpace, and you are comfortable using the API or feel ready to use the API, that is definitely the place to go. It's outside the scope of this training, but I'm going to drop a link into the chat for another training that was offered earlier this year on basically API basics. And that is a good place to start if you're considering using the API to do bulk actions within ArchivesSpace. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you want to do big things in ArchivesSpace outside of the staff user interface, which is what we're focusing on today in this training. If you're not ready to use the API, though, those templates are the way to go. Just making sure that you sort of don't manipulate the template too much, or it'll go all wonky and it won't import like you want. But those are there. And then, of course, you can always use the rapid data entry and other tools that Brittany highlighted today.
Yes. So we can take questions on exporting or anything about digital objects, because we have a few more minutes or several minutes. So I'm willing to answer any questions you guys have.
So we're actually right on target, actually. So we'd scheduled the last 20 minutes for final questions and wrap up. Of course, if there are no final questions, we're not going to sit here quietly and awkwardly for 20 minutes. But now is definitely your opportunity to talk to each other, or maybe ask questions that you hope to have resolved about how to use the module. Hopefully you've learned today how to create the records. But if you have questions about maybe when and how to use complex versus complex versus simple, or even if you want to use the ArchivesSpace digital objects module at all, please feel free to type those in whenever you're ready. And while we're waiting on that, I'll go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping. This was recorded, so the recording of this training will be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming days, as well as on the community-wide training page, where the registration and all of the information about our upcoming trainings is available. And we will continue to have regularly scheduled office hours and trainings over the next year. So do keep an eye out on that, both for the recording to this and other training opportunities in the future. And don't forget the workshop course materials that are available to you. Even if you don't have time to do the exercises because nobody has time, please do save that workbook. You'll definitely be finding that handy as you start to implement digital objects, or as you continue to implement digital objects. Is there any discussion about eliminating the giant red outline and lettering for the digital object link in the PUI and allowing us to change the size? I'm not sure. So this is a good opportunity to talk about if there's ever anything within ArchivesSpace that you are a feature or a request that you would like to make. We do have a publicly available development catalog on our website, and I'll try to find that in a minute when I'm not talking. And you can always check to see what's on the roadmap for changes and additions to ArchivesSpace. But if you have a specific issue with your own implementation, like you want it to look a certain way, you can always customize your own ArchivesSpace either through the config file or through a plugin, or maybe get with your hosting provider to see what sort of customization options are available. You mentioned that ArchivesSpace is developing a DAM. ArchivesSpace is not developing a DAM. So ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system, digital objects cannot reside within ArchivesSpace. ArchivesSpace is only to describe digital content and contain digital content metadata. It's not a digital asset management system.
I'm also interested in discussions about the icon on the public user interface. So I've talked to a few people about it, but haven't seen any requests to change it myself.
Looks like there was a JIRA ticket for it. So if there is a ticket, be sure you comment on it. And Rde, if you want to share a link to the ticket for others, whether or not things are implemented and whether or not our development prioritization team moves things forward for development depends on community input.
Yeah, and please share it via the listserv so people are aware and they can share their input. Of course, there is a way to not see that, which is using thumbnails, but if your institution doesn't want to use thumbnails, you can consider customizing that until it's just an out-of-the-box feature, or if it becomes an out-of-the-box feature thing.
All right, and I dropped a link to our development catalog there, and I'm going to drop another link when I find it on how to submit a feature request if there's a change to ArchivesSpace you'd like to see. All right. All right, and there's no other questions coming through the Q&A right now. I want to make sure we give plenty of time, but also don't want to belabor the point. But if we don't have any other questions come in, I definitely do want to take some time to thank Brittany for doing this, for taking time out of her schedule to offer this training. It's always really fun to work with you, Brittany, so I'm glad that you were able to do it. And digital objects is always a beast to tackle, so I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, no problem. And yeah, feel free to continue to ask questions of me or just send them via the listserv, whatever. I will be of help.
Yeah, please. If you are an ArchivesSpace member, please do make use of the listserv, especially when it comes to things like digital objects, where everyone is doing something a little bit differently and everyone has a little bit different perspective. It's always nice to hear what other people are doing. Since we're not seeing anything coming in through the Q&A, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And like I said, the recording will be available soon if you missed anything. And I look forward to seeing all of you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Bye, everyone.